Hey folks, welcome back to the show. We have a great episode for you today. I mean, really, don't we always? But today's episode is with one of my favorite people in this biohacking space. His name is Ian Mitchell. I've had him on a bunch of times, and today's topic is completely different from anything that we've talked about before. Now, before we jump in, a little bit of housekeeping to do. Number one, if you're listening to this episode the day that it drops on Tuesday, November 26th, and you have not yet entered to win the amazing immune support prize pack that we are giving away on Instagram, you're going to want to make a note for yourself to head over to Instagram at Natalie Nidham and enter to win that prize pack. You're going to win a Mitolax sun lamp. There's 3 of my most favorite immune support supplements. We've got stuff from Prescriptions, stuff from Healthgevity, and also product from Armra Colostrum. So it's a really, really great prize pack, and you can only win if you enter. So, you better kind of head on over to there and enter to win. In the meantime, also want to thank you for being here. Of course, send you off to natnidham.com to sign up for the newsletter if you don't already receive it. And finally, if you're feeling inspired today, please make sure that you leave us a review, because it's those reviews that allow us to rank and reach more people and share the love of longevity, health span, and vitality. All right, let's talk about this episode. In this episode, I am joined by visionary researcher and innovator, Ian Mitchell. And I'm not overstating this man. We discuss Ian's many scientific ventures, from aging research using carbon-60 to tackling cancer, creating clean water solutions, and even developing carbon-negative concrete. Crazy, right? Like, the guy spans the gamut. Ian's latest project, which is what we're really here to talk about, involves hyper-oxygenated water, known as inhale hydration, which delivers significant health benefits like improved oxygen saturation, reduced heart rate, and potential therapeutic uses for conditions like asthma and even cancer. We dive into the science behind this innovative drink and its far-reaching implications for health and longevity. And I'm going to insert a little bit of a personal story here. I've got to tell you guys that I inhale my inhale. I drink my can of inhale before I work out every single day. And the other day, I got onto my Carol bike after being out of town for 3 weeks. And usually when I'm out of town for 3 weeks and I get back on Carol, nothing replaces Carol like Carol. My performance goes right down the tubes. My cardio just suffers. Cardio's not naturally my strength. Anyway, I chug a can of inhale, and lo and behold, I deliver a performance better than the one I did before I left when I was using the bike consistently. Second story is, I go to the gym the other day, I forget my inhale. And let me just tell you, I dragged myself through that workout. It's really remarkable to me how much of a difference it makes. So let's talk about Ian a little bit. He is a true polymath. I had to say that word. He is a visionary researcher and innovator with a deep passion for longevity research, energy optimization, and even environmental sustainability. With a background in scientific exploration, Mitchell has dedicated his career to unraveling the intricate connections between energy, oxygen, and longevity. So I'm going to let you read more about Ian in the show notes, and I'm also going to tell you where you can get your hands on this inhale hydration business. All you have to do is go to inhalehydration.com/discount/Natalie Nidham 20, or you can go to inhalehydration.com and just use code NATNIDHAM20. All right. So that's NATNIDHAM20 at inhalehydration.com. All right. Now let's jump into the episode. Hey, folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider. Ian Mitchell, welcome to Sedona.
Why, thank you.
Live and in living color.
Happy to be here.
You're one of the few people that you're the only person I've ever recorded live with twice. The first time was in Austin.
Yeah.
Remember, we were both trying to squeeze into the same
right,
frame.
We had the camera
all we had
on the
was
computer.
The computer camera. This time we have a whole setup.
Yeah, it's actually pretty sweet.
Yeah, yes. I know. Thanks to Dex. Thank you, Dex. And so we are gathered here today to talk about two things. We're here to talk about energy.
Yeah.
And oxygen.
Yes.
And I would
two of my favorite topics.
Two of your favorite topics, two of my favorite topics. Certainly energy is everybody's favorite topic because most people at some point, somewhere, wish they had more.
Yeah, I find myself doing that pretty much every day around 4:00.
Yeah. So me, it's around 6:00, 6:30 in the morning as I'm about to hit the gym. And I'm thinking, looking at the workout going, I think I'm going to need a little more juice for this. So.
Yeah. No, and literally that's a lot of the things that I've worked on over the years are, coffee and other things are to compensate for that very thing because you want to have a robust energy profile where you don't go exactly. And fade at the end of the day, which incidentally is why oxygen for me is such kind of a biggie because your brain accounts for like 2% of your body mass and 20% of your oxygen utilization. Yeah. So it's a big fat resource consumptive beast.
Yeah. It's an energy pig, I like to call it.
It is an energy pig. Yeah.
Yeah. So while we're on the topic, let's talk about, well, first of all, traditionally, people might be scratching their heads going, Ian Mitchell, isn't that C60 guy? So let's help people to understand.
Yeah. The nature of pigeonholing. Sure.
Yeah. Like let's talk because you wear many hats, right? You wear the Wizard Sciences hat. You wear the Leela hat. And now we're going to talk about a new hat, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So let's talk a little bit about your many hats and there is a common thread that runs through them. There is,
actually. So way back in the day, about 12, 13 years ago, when I started my lab, I wrote down 6 things on the board that I wanted to solve before I keeled over and cashed in. And that's kind of what I've been doing ever since then. And so literally everything that I've been doing was towards the end of trying to solve those 6 issues. And aging was the first one. And the rationale for that was if I'm going to actually make a dent and move the needle on all of the things that I'm trying to do, to kind of push humanity forward, I need a little runway because
I need more time.
Right. Pencils down. That was not really an option. I needed a little more time to take the test. So I thought aging would be the first one. And so that's actually the carbon 60 was kind of my, first foray into really radically changing the aging curve and kind of flattening it out at the top so that instead of, sort of the bell curve of life that we usually see where you're kind of little and not terribly strong and then middle-aged and then you kind of become infirm as you get older, you could ramp that up to being kind of middle-aged and just hold it there for many, many, many decades.
Hold that thought.
Yeah. And, exactly. And so carbon 60 was one of it was actually the most viable way that I found to do that. It's definitively not the only way to do it, right? Mm-hmm. You can go in and reprogram Yamanaka factors. You can do chemical cocktails that trigger de-aging. You can do consistent hyperbaric therapies that increase telomeric length. Shia Fradi's study a few years ago. There's lots of different ways to skin that cat, but this was by far and away the easiest to me. And for pound, with the cost and all of the variability of all the other approaches, it was the one that I ran with.
Yeah.
Now, it's not the only one that I do, because I still think NAD precursors are great. I think bioregular peptides are great.
Mm-hmm.
And
music to my ears.
Yeah, truly. Yes. Well, and all of those things, it's because human physiology, you're not just a meat suit, right? It's not just chemistry. It's not just biochemistry. It's magnetic. It's photonic. It's electromagnetic. And so to really adjust all of the things so that you end up with a robust system that can last a long time, you have to address all those things. So that was item number 1. And then it was cancer was item number 2. And I've made some pretty solid strides on that front. And, that's a lot of people are doing better because of that. And that actually makes me very happy because it's something
that's amazing.
Yeah, well, it's a need, right? Because as a species, I understand it, and it's actually a very good mechanism because it kind of thins things out and takes the resources away from the ill and the sick and the infirm and old, and reallocates them towards the young and the strong and the prospering and moving into society. And I get that, but on a personal level, it's crushing, right?
Yeah.
And also the rapidity with which that happens to people seems to be accelerating, right? It's
for sure. It's all the assaults, right?
Yeah.
It's the load that the body's trying to deal with.
Well, everybody's constantly bathed in a soup of both chemical toxins and electromagnetic stressors, and all of that stuff. When you additively kind of lump it on, it's the straw that breaks the camel's back, right? I think it's kind of, in a lot of ways, like when people talk about isolating some biological, dysregulation like autism or something like that. It doesn't really matter what it is. it's difficult because as people, we like machine learning is great for assessing lots of variables and lots of data. Humans, we kind of suck at multivariate systems analysis. It's just, we aren't that thing, right? We're very beautiful and creative and can do all these great things. That's not our jam, right? So, when you take machine learning systems and you put a ton of data in it, you can suss things out that you normally wouldn't be able to, and you see patterns, right? And I have always seen patterns perhaps a little differently than your average bear. And because of that, I was able to kind of go, oh, well, I think if I isolate this, I can affect this. And it's like lining up billiard ball shots, but with, chemicals or photons or whatever you're trying to do. I mean, because genuinely, I am entirely ambivalent about what the thing is that it is. Like C60 is great for longevity. Terrific. So is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide if you take it via IV, right? Like, and I do NAD injections, IVs. I know you do those too. All
that's
that
what
stuff.
we're here for.
Yeah.
Or at least that's what I'm here for.
Yeah. And it's, those things are great. But so that was this cancer was the second thing I wanted to make a dent in. And I would say that have done a good job, but I'm, continuing to, I actually want like a foolproof solution, right? It will be checked off the box permanently once something has something, like a growth of some sort, and they go in and then they leave and they don't. Yeah. And that's entirely doable. Like the technology, I've actually seen that technology. There was an engineer named John Kansas, and his last name was Kanzius, and he was working with a doctor named Stephen Mitchell, and they were set up at MD Anderson, and I actually talked to Stephen. They've done a lot of really great research. It was very similar to the path that I was approaching, but they actually, I think, were far farther along the curve. Unfortunately, when they got everything seemingly working, they were shut down and all of the equipment was taken away. And when I actually talked to the doctor, Stephen, my assessment, he wouldn't have said this probably, but he just sounded kind of bummed, but
really, I can't imagine why. His life's work gone.
Yeah. And that's the thing. So apart from trying to solve all the puzzles, you have to look at the system you're in, right? And that particular thing is medical industry is very large, but it is also an ecosystem. And there's a lot of capital at play. And so you have to do things in such a way that you don't upset the apple cart, that you work more additively or kind of in concert with other people. You don't want to go, chemotherapy is stupid, stop it. Radiation is stupid, stop it. That may or may not actually be the case, but the system that we've evolved in has both of those things in sort of the predominant positions in oncology. So you don't come up with things that are in opposition that are going to completely eliminate the use of those. You come up, in my opinion, with things that will kind of help those to be better and be less damaging to people, enhance the effects as opposed to something that's detrimental and in opposition to it. Because if you end up in diametric opposition to the larger powers at play in the medical industry,
take you out.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
And that's just, it's not my opinion. It's just, that's how that works.
Well, it seems to work that way, but let's not get into that right now.
So that was
aging,
item 2. Cancer, clean water.
Clean water is good.
Clean water is good, and it's something that's entirely doable. I mean, with the amount of money that's spent literally every year on Christmas just in the United States, you could quite literally provide clean water for every person around the entire planet. Right? No one would have to suffer. Now, my particular take on that is maybe with the whole idea of Christmas being what it was, supposed to be. I think probably a better use of that monetary resource would be trying to help all of the people of the world. Just my take.
Imagine how much later the landfills would be if we could rechannel Christmas money to clean water for the
Well,
planet.
There'd be a lot less plastic and a lot more hope.
Yeah, no kidding. Anyway, so that'll
clean
be
water.
Clean water is a project. Yes.
Global warming, that was another. And to that end, I worked on a project for carbon negative concrete. And so concrete, if it were a country, would be the third largest producer of global greenhouse gas emissions in the world. So it would be China.
That's right, guys. That's not cows.
Yeah.
It's concrete. Starts with a C and an O, but ends completely differently.
Yeah. So it would be China, then the U.S., then concrete, the nation of concrete. And it accounts for 8% of the greenhouse gas burden in the world. And so I developed a thing and you can look up the patents on it. It's kind of a nifty thing, but it basically leverages a thing called biochar, which was you take organic material, like brush and things like that, anything that's cellulosic, so it has cellulose in it, and then you pyrolyze it, which means you suck the oxygen out of the environment. You heat it up to 1200 or so-ish degrees in the case of what I was doing, and you cook it down until it's like really, really pure carbon. And then you include that in the concrete, and then you do a couple of other tricks with different constituents in the concrete to make the bond strength higher and the tensile strength. And you can end up with something that basically not only eliminates the 8% addition, but takes out another 24%. So not that everybody would, but if they did in fact ubiquitously shift to this worldwide, it would eliminate a third of the global greenhouse gas burden instantly.
And so where's that project going?
It's
Can I get some for my driveway?
Unfortunately, like a lot of things, that's just, that's a financial constraint. And I did that as a project for another company. So, a lot of times people used to reach out to me and say, hey, can you crack this puzzle? And I love that. Genuinely. I'm probably too curious. And especially,
how long does it take you to solve a Rubik's Cube?
Not that long.
Yeah. just putting it out there.
Actually, we have a collection of those at my house. So we have all of them.
All the different shapes.
The 4x4, 5x5, 6x6. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I just had to ask the question.
Yeah.
I know the answer, but
pretty quick.
So the concrete.
So the concrete
is just sitting on a shelf somewhere?
Yeah, just sitting on someone's shelf. Now, that's not to say, and this actually...
So if anybody's listening and has an interest in concrete, I can put you in touch.
Well, so this was kind of an interesting thing to me because that process, going through that, developing something that I thought would really work very well, and then seeing it actually not really go anywhere, kind of made me rethink the way that I do consulting work.
Okay.
Because I no longer am doing things like that. So
for other people.
Yeah. Because I would rather be in control of it. And if I, choose to give something away, then I can literally just give it away to say somebody who's going to utilize that to do something good. And and truly, like for me, I have a pretty reasonable standard of living. I'm fine. At the end of the day, it's not about, how much dragon gold have I hoarded in my hollow mountain. I'm maybe measuring things a little differently. I'm sure much to the chagrin of some of my partners over the years that, it wasn't like, but that's just, I don't know. Maybe that's maybe with the world and the state that it's in, maybe that's not the right approach, but it's still the approach that I'm taking. So we'll see how it plays out.
It works. Yeah. Okay. So we have aging, we have cancer,
clean water,
concrete. That's 4.
Yeah. Global warming,
5. Yeah.
Then free energy. Yeah. Which I know sounds like a misnomer, and everybody will.
You mean like electricity energy?
Yeah.
Like energy to run our house energy?
Yes, precisely.
Well, actually, that doesn't sound so crazy if you think about how much energy is actually floating around in the atmosphere.
Well, that's the thing, is it's not just floating around in the atmosphere. My particular take in the way that I went with this was I worked on a thing I called it the tangent motor. And it's basically, and we have a prototype sitting at a lab in Washington State. And basically the idea was not to try and generate power in the normal sense, but to leverage things. And in this case, I leveraged resonance. And it was because the Earth has a particular geomagnetic field, and it also has a harmonic field, right? And so if you leverage a very small thing, then you can kind of lock into the overarching system, and you can literally tap into a kind of a principle called resonant entrainment, where things express a certain degree of energy, but then the energy level scoops up when they are trying to entrain to something else. So if you think of kind of tuning forks, right? Yeah. You can hit one tuning fork and then another tuning fork of the same pitch will resonate without any contact or anything like that, because it's sympathetic harmonic resonance. The same thing applies to motion. And if you tap into the way that the Earth spins and the fields that it creates, you can leverage that. So that's the free energy component. Now, I'm not going to make the same mistake that some other really bright inventors made historically, where they go off and say, I'm going to make free energy, because that's a real easy way to have your towers burn down and a lot of bad stuff go down. So, because again, you don't
work within the system.
Yeah, you work within the system. And I also think the avarice thing is something that throws people, like at my lab, we have an old 1969 Chevy C10 pickup that we completely retooled the engine in with stuff that anybody else could do. And it was based on work from Shell Oil Company in 1971. They had this contest with their internal engineering team to see who could come up with the best gas mileage. And the car that won was this old crummy 1959 Opel station wagon, which is a heavy car. It's not like some brilliant hypercar. It's actually a very chunky, heavy car. Keep in mind, 1971. What do you think the mileage they got on this car was?
I have no idea because I don't count.
Okay, well, it was 372 miles to the gallon. Yeah. So, and the system they use.
Okay, I don't do miles. However, that sounds like it's really far.
Well, it's multiplying
to the gallon. That's insane.
Yeah, it's multiplying everything by about a factor of 10 or 11.
Yeah.
And the technology
on a heavy clunky car.
Yeah, on a heavy clunky car. Stupid simple technology. So what did they do? They did what any company would do.
They buried it.
They buried it. Yeah, they patented it and buried it. Because if you look at the revenue stream, right, it's basically they would make a 10th or an 11th of what they would have made if people who were using gas got that kind of efficiency out of an internal combustion engine.
Right.
So
okay. All right. So this part of the conversation is slightly depressing, and we're going to lift
not.
it up.
Now,
the cool thing is it's possible. The bad news is it's nowhere to be seen. The good news is.
Well, the good news is actually there are a lot of people who've been working on this, and there are other people, like I actually have that up and running and did some kind of nifty stuff with hydrogen to offset the dip in the power. So basically it's pretty simple. All you do is in the case of mine, I kind of upped it a little bit to make it fancy dancy.
Of course you did. Yes.
So you pull a big cylinder off of the radiator, which runs at about 185 degrees. Then
Stay with us, guys. We're going to talk about humans in just a second. Hang on.
I promise it will become germane to everything in a minute. So, you do a couple of fancy tricks and you end up just basically atomizing the gas as it goes into a chamber. And then you mix that with hydrogen that does real-time distillation in the car with, plates that are just electric plates that crack the hydrogen out. And the reason for that is hydrogen has a much faster flash point than gasoline does. So you kind of lose a little power in the way that the truck feels when you're moving it. But if you increase the hydrogen, the flash point's more rapid. So it feels just the same as a normal internal combustion engine around a gas, except it gets many fold times the mileage.
Cool.
So yeah, and my take on this is that's awesome. It's something to tinker with, but I'm not an auto guy. I'm just going to set it out in the wild. Like anybody can have it after I'm done with all the validations and
make sure the hydrogen doesn't explode.
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of having real-time distillation is there is very little. So you have a 1 gallon reservoir of water and then you have, electrolyte solution that pumps in as well. And then you go into the plates and then you make a little bit of hydrogen and batch dump it into the carburetor through the top after it mixes with the vaporized gas.
I knew that.
So, yeah, not to get too in the weeds, but so basically,
we're weeding.
we're probably, we may need the weed eater for this.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I'm just going to, once that's all done, I'm just going to release it into the wild. I have no desire to make a penny from that. Like once people can tinker with it, I think a lot of this stuff is democratization, right? How do you make it accessible? That's what I'm doing with the stem cell therapies, right?
Yeah.
So the V-cell procedures, the very small embryonic like stem cells, I've been doing clinical validations at UCLA for the past couple months. And my thought there is those procedures, people have been charging out the yin yang for them. Not necessary, right?
Yeah.
But
and it's your own V cells,
and
right?
it's your own cells, right?
Yeah.
And you can pull them out, and it's within a 4-hour window, and you're not doing an expansion of the culture of the cells, so you're well within the bounds and everything. But you can get incredible therapeutic benefits. So my thought was, okay, how can I show the high leverage points of this, kind of the 80-20 analysis, so I can get people all of the benefits without all of the costs, so they can go in and for a few grand they can do the procedure instead of it being $12,000 to $30,000 for one of those procedures, which is loopy, right? Like nothing in there costs that much, And I guess I misread the Hippocratic Oath and that bit about able to afford a new Mercedes every month. It's probably me. I'm probably just not recalling that. I just don't see that as necessary. But I do see people not suffering as necessary. So anyway, so that's why I've been working on all the validations, and that'll roll out at the beginning of the year. I think we'll publish the papers and then start teaching lots and lots of doctors, because there's already, I know a lot of these people, there's already kind of a waiting list of people who want that. And so I'm just kind of pumping the brakes until I have everything validated, because my thought on that was with all of the other groups that are doing that, no one actually, every time I would ask the hard questions, like the real deep cellular biology questions, nobody could give me a straight answer. So I was like, okay, I want to know, right?
Yeah.
Like, what am I looking at? So we did all this kind of testing, looking for CD133, CD45s, SSEA4s, like all of the, precursors to progenitor stem cells, looking at that so we could see what was going on. And now that I've, got the first round of data, we'll do the second and third rounds of data and then compile all of it, publish a paper on it, and then just start teaching people.
Rock and roll, coming soon to a theater near you.
And then the last one was superluminal travel. That's on the list. Which
We're
is
not
just
detailing that.
Yeah, faster than light travel. And I haven't cracked that one yet.
Okay, cool.
In
a work in progress.
But
now let's go back to energy.
Yes.
Like people energy.
People energy. Yeah. And again,
just people energy.
I apologize to everyone for the insane diatribe and lengthy digression about what it is I've been working on for the past.
It's actually cool information. I could do a podcast just on that stuff, but we're not going to because we're going to talk about the fact that as human machines, we produce energy.
We do.
Right? I mean, I remember once being in a giant conference room with a bunch of people and somebody, can't remember exactly who it was standing on the stage, belaboring the fact that people keep saying, I need more energy. Give me more energy. I need energy from the outside. And he goes, here's the news, guys. We are energy factories. It's like you make energy. Your cells make energy every second of every minute of every hour of every day. And so the real question is, how do we enable the system to make the energy that we need? And how do we stop disabling the system to make the energy we really need? And and I mean, maybe this project dovetailed off your clean water project to some degree.
It did.
And the energy project and oxygen in of itself is a longevity molecule if we think about it.
Well, definitively. And the interesting thing, kind of looking at patterns from an overarching sense, when I wrote that list on the board, all those years ago, it was kind of a stream of consciousness of what do I think I can actually do and how can I help? Mm-hmm. And I literally wrote those down. I was like, that's a great list. If I can do that, I will have contributed. Yeah. And I'll feel good at the end of the day. X's on the eyes, I'll feel fine.
At 147.
And right. And so what's been peculiar though is literally one project led to the other, right? Doing the aging research, I was like, oh my God, if you ameliorate this dysregulation of this and the cytokines in this, you can do all these crazy things for cancer. And so then, and every subsequent iteration of those really rolled into the next. And sure enough, water, who knew, right? And this is why when I taught biochem, I had 2 required books on my reading list. One was The Fourth Phase of Water by Gerald Pollack. The other one was about quantum biology. And this was to kids who were, they were seniors, so they were all going off to med school, or for the most part, because nobody really cared about biochem except that it was required.
Yeah, exactly. I want to grow up to be a biochemist.
Yeah. And so those things, the reason I included The Fourth Phase of Water is because water is something that is all around us. It's totally ubiquitous on this planet, but people think they understand it. And this goes back to that, the idea that the biggest impediment to progress and knowledge isn't ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge, right? Mm-hmm, you think you already know something, so you don't look. Yeah. And I can't tell you how many things, like when I was working on oxygen, oh my God, same thing. I started out working on ozone, and then ozone cascaded over into oxygen. And there were all these assessments that I made that I thought I knew because that's what the literature said, right? And I go back and I read all the historical literature on everything. Turns out a lot of times we're just wrong, right? Mm-hmm. Science, and I used to tell my students this, is science it's a lens that you see things through at a particular time. The best thing I could possibly do and teach today is going to look stupid 1,000 years from now. People will look back and go, they thought what? I mean, really, like heliocentricity versus geocentricity, right? Like we all know the sun's the center now, right? But back in the day, they're going to kill you if you say that, right? That's just like, you don't do that. The Catholic Church will, lock you away in a tower or burn you upside down in the middle of a town square.
Or both. Yeah. Okay. So let's get back to water and oxygen because, and ozone and oxygen, because ozone is a therapeutic modality that is used. As a matter of fact, I got hooked up to a machine and EBU, and they cleaned my blood they pumped my blood full of ozone. They pumped my blood full of ozone and, they pulled the blood out and then they ran it through a filter and then it got ozonated and then it got lit. It got irradiated. And then it got pushed back into, redeliver to my body a beautiful cherry red color, which was really interesting.
Yeah. And so I actually worked on a project where we were doing, kind of a version of that autohemotherapy where you pull the blood and you ozonate it. It was sort of a precursor to the EBU that everybody is doing now, which is actually EBU is a much better system. But when you look at just kind of the old school autohemotherapy, ozone is a very reactive molecular species. It's like the third most reactive molecular species. So I'm just going
to interrupt for 1 second. So for you guys that are listening who are not familiar with ozone, when you if you happen to step outside right after a powerful thunder and lightning storm, that funky smell in the air is ozone, and I find it makes me a little nauseous. So you don't want to breathe ozone, and we'll try. No. And Ian's going to tell us exactly what ozone is, because it's really just more oxygen molecules stuck together. So you don't want to breathe ozone, but there's a funny thing that happens when you deliver ozone to the blood. So
kind of miraculous, actually. Yeah. So ozone is O3, right? So there's 3 oxygen. We typically breathe diatomic oxygen, which is just O2. And the extra oxygen, it has a charge. And so it wants to swipe electrons, right? So it's stripping away electrons from things, which is what happens when you oxidize something. So that's why nature uses it as a cleansing agent. So after storms, it goes through and it strips away things, kills viruses. And that's why, biologically speaking, it's incredibly good, because no virus can withstand it, no bacteria. It's just any sort of pathogen is going to get eviscerated, because you're not affecting it at some sort of surface level. Right?
You're not trying to squish it. Right. You're just snuffing it.
Yeah. You're just stripping away the membranes. And because it's a subatomic interaction, nothing has a defense against that, right?
Yeah.
We have an innate immune system. We don't have a don't rust me system,
Exactly.
And so, and in great part, aging is a function of that, right? We are oxidizing. That's why everybody focuses on antioxidants, which they do definitively have their place. I think there's perhaps a little bit too much, focus on that, though.
Okay, I love that you brought up antioxidants, because, it's one of those topics where you take two people from the opposite sides of the fence and put them in a room, and there will be blood, fur, and feathers everywhere, because antioxidants are the best. Antioxidants are the worst. And as per usual, when it comes to topics like this, the truth lies somewhere in the middle.
Agreed.
You need a little bit of antioxidants at the right time, and they'll fix some damage. But they're there for a reason, to address the healing process,
Agreed.
Right? So we need, like, right after an injury, you need that oxidative stress to drive the healing before you jump in like an overprotective mother saying, no, we're going to dampen that out right this second.
They'll never learn. Yeah. And that's true, because that's why I actually prefer selective antioxidants, things that are both, they kind of like the adaptogen version of an antioxidant where they can do both. Accept,
like hydrogen.
Yeah, accept or donate electrons. Exactly. Like molecular hydrogen, carbon-60, methylene blue. There are quite a few that are really good. And that's why, you get people in those camps that are kind of split, like, molecular hydrogen is the best thing ever. Methylene blue is the best thing ever.
Is not.
and
I like they're all good.
Yeah, they're all good, right? Everyone's pretty. We can all get along. You all can dance. And so I actually, again, I'm kind of ambivalent. If I found something better, I'd use it, right? So I use methylene blue. I use molecular hydrogen. I use carbon-60. I use hyper-oxygenation. Like, all of those modalities, because they work.
Okay. So let's go back to our O3. O3 is ozone.
Yeah.
You've got an extra oxygen molecule that's looking for electrons.
And then so it strips things apart. Now, when you do autohemotherapy, which is basically where you pull blood out and then you inject ozone into it, what happens is the ozone goes in and it reacts, because it's super reactive. It reacts in a couple of milliseconds, and then everything turns this beautiful cherry red color. And that's because the blood is super oxygenated, right? There's a ton of oxygen saturation in the blood, and then you reintroduce it into your system. Now, historically in the literature, what was called and is still called is you're setting up an ozonide cascade, right? And ozonides are these cascade molecules that are a result in your body of an oversaturation of ozone. Not actually true. Now, is that the term? Yeah, that's the term. Is it accurate? No. As it turns out, it's oxygen, right? And but when I worked on an ozone project, we all just called it that because that's what its reference says in the literature. Turns out that's really kind of a misnomer. It should have actually been called oxonides.
Right.
Because your body, not shockingly, doesn't have an endogenous system to sense the presence and levels of ozone, but it does oxygen, right? Because if you breathe ozone, it's a bad scene, right? You will strip your lungs, and for all intents and purposes, they're on fire, right?
Yeah.
That rapid, oxidation, that's fire.
Yeah.
And so you can burn your lungs. Now, ozone is great as a therapeutic if you put it back in the blood and reintroduce it. If you do it intrarectally, intravaginally, those membranes are fine. You don't have any problems. You can do rectal insufflation, and it's fantastic.
Even ears.
Even the
apparently.
ears.
Yeah.
They're really good. But you do not want to do, through your mouth or your nose, because that will go directly into your lungs and damage you.
Which is ironic.
It is.
If you think about it, because we know that without oxygen, we die. You would think that there's no such thing as too much of a good thing, and yet there is, even when it comes to oxygen.
It's interesting, right? So I was having a conversation with another scientist, and we were talking about oxygen. He said, "Well, diatomic oxygen is a reducing agent, right? It's going to burn things up. It's reactive." And I said, "Yeah, not so much. Ozone, definitively yes. Oxygen, yeah, sure. Diatomic oxygen is still technically a reduction, but." You're going to go through that. And when you oxidize something and you're stripping the electrons off, if that were really the case, we'd all be dead instantly, right? Mm-hmm. So we too, because we are trying to accept electrons, donate electrons, it's all a cycle, right? That's why it's called the electron transport chain. And it's really in a cycle. It's the citric acid cycle. You basically, you don't want to get fixated on something that's a linear process, because in nature, generally speaking, that doesn't work.
It's always a cycle.
It's always a cycle.
There's always a loop.
Yeah, it is.
So, okay. So we're running the risk of getting too deep into the chemistry again. So let's talk a little bit about why I don't want to say why oxygen is good for the body, but without getting to the toxicity of oxygen, there's some really interesting research about how more oxygen is better to a point. To a point,
right? If you get too much, you'll actually get tremors and shakes, and you have oxygen toxicity.
But hyperbaric chambers, for example, have been shown. There's some fascinating research on aging. There's incredible knowledge on healing wounds, on treating traumatic brain injuries. So we know that delivering a dose of oxygen to the body
is fantastic, right? It actually oversaturating the system will stimulate the electron transport chain, and you will literally forcibly advance the production of energy in the mitochondria. When you do that, your body has more resources, right? So you're literally, in the case of diabetic wounds or things like that, they found phenomenal upregulation of healing times, right? They get great healing times. If Shaya Frati, who's a researcher in Israel, right? I know we both know that study. Shaya Frati showed very definitively that all of the markers of aging that they were testing for, not to say all of them, but at that study, all of the markers that they tested for showed a really profound reduction after 90 days, right?
In humans, by the way.
In humans,
old, elderly, half the time it's either mice or 30-year-olds or 30-year-old men. And in this case, it was elderly men and women who got invited to spend, 90 days?
Yeah.
90 minutes a day.
Yeah. 90 minutes a day, 5 days a week over a period of 60 days was the first time point, and then 90 days was the last. And
they actually found, chamber.
And they found that the biggest difference was by the 60-day mark.
Yeah.
And so if you did this, and the way they did it was they actually didn't do it in the sense that it was hyperbaric oxygen, but they didn't put them in an environment that was completely oxygenated. Right? They actually breathed oxygen from a cannula and then put in high pressure air at 2 atmospheres into the large chamber.
Okay, so then it was the equivalent of being in a hard chamber, though, not a soft.
Because
the soft chambers are 1.2 atmospheres. The hard chambers are the 2.
Yeah, it was a very large hard chamber, and so then you'd breathe through the cannula, and what they would do is they would have them breathe for 20 minutes with the cannula, so they're taking in oxygen at 2 atmospheres of pressure. Then they remove that, and then they breathe regular air at 2 atmospheres, and then they put it back on for another 20, take it off for 5, put it on for 20, and do that cycle all the way through the 90-minute mark. And they did that 5 days a week. And at the end of that study, all of their telomere lengths had extended, their inflammatory markers had dropped. So, everything that they were looking for definitively showed that the additional oxygen made that difference.
Yeah.
And so I was working on kind of a different tangent, but I wanted to get oxygen saturation in the body, not to that degree, right? Because again, you have to have such a special setup to do that. That
not accessible.
No, and it's not. I have a hard shell hyperbaric chamber that we built in my lab, right? And so it's a big chamber that you can go in and hang out. But that's not accessible for everybody, right? And if you want a
Mm-hmm.
hard shell, it's going to be 50 grand or more.
And insurance issues.
Yeah,
'Cause-
and you need a lot of oxygen,
Yeah.
and a soft shell chamber. The lower things, they're good, but they're not going to do some of the same therapeutic benefits, right? You just can't get that until you hit the 2 atmosphere threshold, and that's kind of an interesting thing, especially with oxygen. One of the things I noted from kind of working on this is there are certain threshold points biologically that if you get close to it, you don't get the same effect, but when you get over it, there's a pronounced shift.
Right.
Physiologically. And I always joke with my staff, I was talking to him and I said, look, it's kind of like if I said, go boil some water, but just heat the water to 50 C twice. That's not going to do anything, right? You have to hit the threshold at 100 C for it to boil.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you just made it kind of lukewarm, and that's that.
Yeah.
Right. And as it turns out, biology being what it is, our bodies respond the same way. There are certain saturation thresholds. So physiologically, with oxygen, the threshold was 80 parts per million in something that you could consume, triggered this entire shift in the cascade of ozonides, right? Which are really, I'm going to say,
Oxygenides.
should be oxygenides, right?
Yeah.
So what happens is I started out with the medium of water, right? I was just going to take water and hypersaturate the water with oxygen. And I did that. And so there were other companies out there, but they all had, it was kind of sad when I looked at it.
So what's normal water? Let's talk about
normal water is about 5 ppm.
So 5 parts per million is oxygen.
Yeah.
Then somebody else had this notion of
Yeah.
adding oxygen to water.
Well, if you go to the mountains and you go to a mountain stream, right? That's
Yeah.
at about 10 parts per million. So
wow. So that's already
yeah, and
double.
so and think about all the refreshing imagery you get, drinking from a mountain stream, right?
Go find one. Good luck with that.
yeah,
Yeah.
go find one that's not fraught with toxins.
Yeah.
But the idea is it has more oxygen, and we perceive that, right? So when you get that imagery of like, it's so refreshing, a lot of that is because there's an additional oxygen concentration. And then there were some other people that had done it, and they hit the highest I found was there was one group that was at about 41 and one group that it was about 42, and that was bar none the best I could find anywhere, which is cool, but the biological threshold was 80 ppm. So when you hit 80, you get magic sauce, right? All sorts of things start to happen. Your blood redistributes, it starts to flow properly, it's oversaturated. So your heart rate, the load on your heart
Goes down.
So lessened. Yeah, your heart rate drops about 10 beats a minute or more. Or if you're doing something athletic, like when we were doing trials and testing with it, we would get people where we'd accelerate their heart rate up to 160, 170 beats a minute, have them drink 1 can of the water that was, super oxygenated, and then their heart rate drops down below 100. And it happens super fast. Now, interestingly, the reason I ran down this path was I had developed the water, had been drinking it because, as you said, it's, kind of what did you call the term for the brain, being kind of a pig, energy pig?
Energy pig.
Yeah.
Brain's an energy pig. And you think a lot.
I do. And that's actually, and that's kind of the thing is, as you said, the energy pig, it is very resource consumptive. And, by the end of the day, I'm using my noggin all day, every day. I literally start the day out super early doing mental puzzles and, just trying to find any sort of edge I can get for acuity, right? So I do lots of nootropics, and I've worked on it for well over a decade now, trying to come up with different things, because I love coffee, but it's an adenosine receptor antagonist, right? So it's not actually making you more energetic. All it's doing is it's binding to the receptor where adenosine goes, and you don't feel tired, right? So it inhibits the degradation
it keeps you awake.
of nerves. Yeah, you feel alert, but it's artificial, which is why you get jittery. You're still tired.
Yeah.
Right? You don't actually have more energy. You don't have more power. You're just numb. It's like saying, "Oh, I'm not broken. There's a Band-Aid over my wound."
Yeah.
You still have a wound. No. I'm fine.
Oh, look, there's a Band-Aid. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and so
then sugar is the other place people like, in terms of the things, because the when the brain's looking for energy, it's non-specific.
Yeah,
it doesn't
is.
care. And all it says is and I think a lot of people experience this emotionally and physiologically, is that energy. And you'll find this, guys. I mean, you probably find this either if it's your 4 o'clock slump or if you're trying to burn the midnight oil. And this is where I see a lot of people, that's where the pedals come off the bike kind of thing.
It's very
because the brain is like, I know where we can get energy fast. That bag of gummy bears over there.
Oh my God. And so, hey, Yeah, I've got some candy. It's tucked away in that cabinet. Yeah, and
your brain mysteriously remembers the stash of sugar, and Halloween's coming up at the time of recording this podcast, and everybody's house is about to fill up. But the bad news is that it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, and so, I mean, in a perfect world, you'd be like, oh, no, I'm going to stay in ketosis. I'm going to just motor through. I'm going to optimize. Yeah. No. That doesn't really happen. Your brain's like, feed me now. You need something, get
and
it.
And that sugar's going to do it for us.
Yeah, and so, right. And so we go for sugary things and caffeinated things and all that stuff. And I am not saying they have their place, right? Like those definitively have their place.
Sort of. Not
sort
really.
Of. Yeah, personally, if I could wave my magic wand, I would probably have sugar go down by like a factor of 100 because that's what it's gone up by over the past, couple centuries. Our bodies are literally not designed for that, but that's an entirely different thing.
That's another conversation.
Yeah, that's another conversation.
But we're just saying.
So with this, what I did is, I hypersaturated the stuff, right? So it's super, super, super high concentration, and it's over 100 parts per million. Now, and the rationale, I don't bill it
because if 80 is good, 100 surely must be better.
Well, the rationale there is when you open the can up, right?
There's a loss.
There's a big loss, right? There's a dissipation because it's trying to balance out with partial pressure in the atmosphere. And so you lose a lot, right? And gas is seeking kind of a balance point, a stasis. And that takes a little while, but you'll notice, like in what I did, it stays in there a lot longer because it's kind of like you've taken the little diatomic molecules and wedged them around the bond angle of the water.
Oh, so they can't move around as much.
No, it's actually, and the scale of these is kind of interesting because it's so very similar to the size of a water molecule that you can really, under a high degree of compression, like there's this ridiculous process to do this, right? So it's not just like squeeze oxygen in water. There's all sorts of ridiculous things that you actually, maybe not everybody did, but I did in order to figure out how to get the saturation point so much higher. There's a lot of molecular gymnastics, but it's cool, right? It's like for me, I kind of nerded out. It was like, wow, what's the next thing on my giant Rube Goldberg? Like mouse spins the pinwheel, increases oxygen, right? Right.
Or take the old style pressure cooker and hack it with a Vitamix motor. But anyway, we're not going to tell that story because we're going to run out of time. So anyway.
So at the end of the day, after going through this kind of crazy process, you end up with this water that's really cool and super, super oxygenated. So when you drink it, people don't realize this, but everybody actually consumed oxygen in a liquid format, and you've done it for 40 weeks, right? The entire gestational cycle, you're consuming all of your oxygen in the liquid format. You have an entire aquaporin network in all of your cells, and that architecture is still there. So if I leverage that, I knew that I could get all of this to drop into people's systems like that. And so
from water, guys, instead of air, just to be clear.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting. So when I had these cans after I first made it, I just finished working out and I was gassed, right? Just completely gassed. And I had no idea that it would do this, but I cracked the can and I downed it really quickly. And then I was panting and I was going, and the respiration cycle stopped, literally mid-respiration. And I was like, what the hell's going on?
I just turned into a fish.
Right. And it was so bizarre because I had never felt that sensation. Like, I was like panting and then suddenly not. I thought, oh my God, that is profound. So then I started, wearing pulse oximetry and kind of looking at it and like taking various pulse oximeters and putting them on and trying different scenarios to see like, okay, what's happening here? And so across the board, and this was kind of the basis for our clinical trial, is across the board showing that when you drink this, your blood oxygen saturation goes up and your heart rate goes down, whichever decreases your cardiac load more.
Well, which makes sense because let's talk about why your heart rate goes up when you're stressing your body, and that is because your body needs more oxygen, and your system says, okay, well then we must breathe harder and pump faster to deliver the oxygen where it's needed. Yeah. All of a sudden, you've delivered oxygen on a silver platter, and your body's not stupid. It's like, well, wait a minute, maybe we don't need to breathe as hard and we don't need to pump as hard.
Yeah.
And we can still have the oxygen.
What's funny is when we were doing this with athletes and they were trying it, it was hilarious because the sort of the incredulity, right? They go, oh my God, it did work. Yeah. Like, because there's, and I totally get it.
It defies the imagination.
It is not terribly logical to think that drinking something is going to make you feel completely sated and like you don't have to breathe hard.
in an oxygen sense. Like we, you can drink something and feel full.
Sure.
From a caloric perspective.
Yeah, and you can feel refreshed, but you're not going to be like, oh my gosh, I'm breathing so easily now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it really does the thing. And it does it quickly too. And so it's the most interesting for me is not so much the sport aspect, right? So they use this at the NFL Combine this year to great fanfare and accolades. And because those kids, they're going out and they are sprinting and doing things that are just pretty damn near superhuman in my capacity. Like I look at it and I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. But they put together a commercial, which I did not ask for. They like cut together. This is the beauty of lots of kids with iPhones. They were so down with the product and they loved it. So they actually made a commercial and sent it to me. I'll send it to you.
They did?
Yes.
Oh my God.
That
would
very
be amazing.
Cool. Yeah, it's very cool. But so I actually am kind of excited by the more marginalized populations, right? So for people that, cancer, because I worked on that a lot, this to me is kind of a boon for that demographic, because cancer is an anaerobic function, right? Hyperbaric therapy is phenomenal for people who have cancer. If you can get past the glucose component, right? If you can stop that and get people in a ketogenic diet and then get them oversaturated with oxygen, it moves the needle, right? So that's a thing that excites me. The other one is just because I've had a lot of reports of this, people stopping the use of albuterol for asthma, right? And the most interesting comment on it was one of the people stopped taking albuterol, and when they would start to have an attack, they would drink a can of that. Not to say it treats, cures, or prevents anything, but this woman's testimony, she said, it also doesn't make me jittery, whereas my heart rate accelerates when I take the albuterol. And I thought, wow, that's kind of fascinating.
And so with asthma, it's a temporary state.
It is.
Like it's an asthma attack, right? Is a temporary state. So by drinking the can of water, you've fulfilled that need of the body for extra oxygen. Does it allow basically the bronchioles or whatever's going into spasm to just kind of relax a little bit?
Well, so the problem is you can't oxygenate because everything starts to constrict. Yeah. And when that pulls together, you're not going to get a release, and that's why you have the problem. So you hit it with albuterol, it opens you up, and you can suddenly breathe. But it does, because it accelerates your heart rate. You get very jittery. It provides oxygen through a secondary mechanism, so you don't have the strain. So my guess would be, and I haven't done any study on this, and I truly, to make that claim, I'd actually want to do like a real-time MRI, do like an fMRI.
So this is an anecdotal.
Yeah, this is completely anecdotal, but it's still like in the note of what really excites me about this. Great for performance, great for my noggin because I'm using it all the time. And it does literally provide energy, as opposed to something that just has the auspices of that, but has a
it's
downstream
clean
effect
energy.
That's not good.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing.
Like if it's, let's say you're working too late, even though you're not supposed to, but let's say you kind of have to.
Right.
This isn't going to keep you up. But how much? So let me ask you, okay, finish your story with the asthma anecdote.
That was pretty much the
It's just you
conclusion
need
of
to
it.
do the studies now to figure out what the mechanism of it, what's happening.
And the reality is, I don't have the reserves to do that, so I will not be doing that study.
Yeah.
I hopefully, there are people who get benefit from it. I probably will do a study on people with cancer for it, because that's something I really want to beat the drum on, because it's an adjunct therapeutic that I think, whether you're going through chemo or radiation or whatever you're doing, literally the presence of oxygen inhibits that, right?
Yeah.
And so that's, inhibits the cancer. And that's a good thing, just across the board.
Across the board.
Yeah.
There's nothing bad about that. So when we drink a can of this water, so the cat's out of the bag, guys. You went through all that stuff, and now we're at the can of water. Finally, when you drink the can of water, how long the oxygen lasts in your body depends on the demand that you're putting on your body at that time.
Yeah.
Whether it's mental or physical, because I know that if I'm doing these days, my torture or my pleasure of the moment is these 45-minute, very intense kind of HIIT classes.
Right.
And so I will find that, it definitely helps me through the class.
Oh, yeah.
But, on the days when I'm hanging out doing a wall sit with 88 pounds in my lap, I do find myself dreaming of a second can of water.
Yeah, well, you burn through it. The effect is, the effect if it's just pure utilization isn't persistent, right? Because your body metabolizes the oxygen.
Yeah.
The thing that I think that's actually more profound are the peripheral effects, right? So it redistributes the way your blood clumps, right? Normally we call it coin rolling, and I'll send you a picture so you can post it. But most everybody's blood, because we're in kind of semi-toxic environments or around
the
EMF
rouleaus
fields.
of blood. You're talking about the yeah.
And so when that happens, you can't oxygenate all of your peripheral vasculature, right? It's microvasculature. And if you look at a red blood cell, it's like 8 microns.
Yeah.
And if you look at those clusters, they're 40, 50, 60, because they're all clumped together and they literally can't go where they need to. But after you drink 1 can of this, it actually expands the blood. All the red blood cells distribute, so they're floating by themselves. And it's quite beautiful. And in the doctor who was doing the clinical trials sent me pictures of her blood. And, and she said, it was kind of cool. She reached out late at night and said, we like the water. We did not expect to see this because it was a persistent effect, and it was much later.
So the declumping of the red blood cells is persistent.
It is
that's
persistent.
Huge.
And that's why I actually think the direct benefits, it provides extra oxygen. That's great. It's good in sports. But the downstream effects that are really super beneficial are allowing your microvasculature to get perfused with oxygen, right? For people with peripheral neuropathy, things like that. That's what they need, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we all need our blood to actually flow, because you can have a lot of oxygen, you can breathe really hard, your heart can pump a whole lot, but if you literally can't deliver it to where it's going because the size is a problem, all of the resources they needed for Hurricane Katrina could be in a truck in Virginia. If the truck can't get there, you don't get it. It's like starving to death being chained 3 feet away from a buffet table.
Okay, that's nasty, but yes.
Gotcha. I mean, it's like all of the resources are there, and you just can't get to them. And this allows it to redistribute so that all of those resources, the resultant is they end up where they're supposed to. And so all of your cells can, perfuse themselves with oxygen and get the energy they need. Yeah. And at the end of the day, I think that's what really beneficially regulates people's physiology, is providing them all the resources that they need. And, we know this. Again, there are lots of different mechanisms to do that in a healthy way. But this, to me, is actually one of those real, key cornerstone things.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, so use case scenarios, guys. If you're just basically thinking, when would I try this or when would I use this? So you would use it when you're looking for physical energy. I'm thinking right now we're in Sedona. We're going on a hike this afternoon.
Right.
I'll be pounding the stuff.
Well, actually,
I'm huffing and puffing on my hikes here because I'm not used to the altitude.
Right. Same here, right? This is at 8,000 feet. I'm used to sea level.
Same.
Right? And so, but I have noticed when I start to pant, I down a can and it's fine. And I've talked to a ton of people who have used it to get around oxygen sickness at elevation in Colorado.
I'll bet.
Yeah. And same thing, right? So a friend of mine said that this year, and we're colleagues, but she said this was the first year in all of the years that they've gone to their cabin, which is at 11,000 feet, that her kids did not get oxygen sickness.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty.
Or
that's
altitude
pretty,
sickness, rather.
Yeah. Which is a lack of oxygen sickness. So that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And then, if you're sitting at your desk looking for, and I would think that, even though we're not going to make any medical claims or anything, having even a can of water a day sets your body up for success.
Sure.
At any, like we were just talking about.
That's very true. There are a lot of studies where you see benefits.
It's a pretty damn good vitamin, right? Without being a vitamin.
Right. You want to have people hydrated and you want to have people oxygenated, right? It's not an either or. You kind of need both.
So it's 2 birds with 1 stone.
Yeah.
So people are going to want to know, where do you get your water? Is it clean? What's in it? What else? Is there anything else in it?
Literally, it's triple filtered, through carbon filters. So super, super pure. And it's, literally the ingredient is water, because people don't count dissolved gases in water as a thing, right? Yeah. So literally the ingredient is water with a lot of dissolved oxygen. And then you can just go to inhale hydration, and that's it. And right now it's actually going to be in stores shortly, but for right now it's just online. And that's kind of the cat's out of the bag now. We just kind of hit this. So
no, and we have a code and everything for you guys. But before we talk about that, people, again, there's more questions. So I'm going to rapid fire the questions at you, because I have those questions and people have asked me those questions. So what happens if I mix electrolytes into my inhale? Should I do that, or should I
do it
drink
separately.
it as is?
Drink it as is.
Perfect.
Yeah. And you're better off, if you want the most pronounced effect, keep it cold, because chilled liquids hold more dissolved gases. and drink it quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it's not hard, folks, because it's pretty darn good.
Yeah, it is actually really good.
It's nice, clean water. Okay. So we don't want to mix it with anything else.
No.
If you want to get the most benefit from it, and I asked this question earlier, you could theoretically fill your water bottle with the water,
You could.
but you will sacrifice a little bit of that oxygen.
You'll lose some. You'll probably go back down to 70, 80 parts per million.
Yeah. And so for those of you who are on YouTube and for those of you who are listening, you're going to want to check out YouTube video for this because we're going to do a little experiment now.
Yeah, this is actually
because
very cool.
you want to do an experiment when you're with Ian. Now, one thing I'm going to say to you, if you're at the gym and you pop this open like I do at 6:30 in the morning, you will get the attention of your coach who will turn around going, "Did you bring beer?" Because there's a very satisfying noise that happens when you pop one of these cans because of the amount of pressure. Now, one more question before you do this.
Yeah.
You can bring it on a plane and it won't turn into a bomb, right?
Yeah, I actually I did in fact test that. And,
that's good.
So I put it in a vacuum chamber and depressurized it to
Yeah, okay, good.
all the way down. Right?
So you're good on a plane. Although you wouldn't get it on the plane because you wouldn't be able to get it through security. So until you get them into the relay stores at the airports on the other side of security, which would be a really good place for this, by the way.
Yeah, and actually that's one of the places that we're looking at. But you can actually, because it's medical grade, you can say that and they will let you through TSA.
Really?
With it. Yeah.
That would be an interesting conversation. Okay, let's give people the audio and the visual. So there's an audio and visual component to this.
Yeah, and when you grab the can, the thing that always cracks me up is it feels insanely solid, like it's like a brick. And the can is actually flimsy. It's just a normal, soda can. But when you hold it, it's incredibly firm, and that's because there's such a high degree of static pressure.
You want me to hold your mic?
Yeah.
While you do this, it's a two-handed job.
Okay.
Well, maybe not for. Oof.
Okay, and it does admittedly sound like a beer. Okay, so when you pour it in, it turns cloudy, and that's because there's so many little nanoscopic oxygen bubbles. They start clustering together and forming macroscopic bubbles, and then it clears up from the bottom to the top.
Yeah.
And so in this, that's stabilized probably 80, 90 ppm right now because it's just been a couple of seconds. So
want to get your hands on this stuff, which I encourage you to try it out because it's quite something to experience.
And truly, everybody's Apple Watch has a setting where they can look at pulse oximetry. Just look at it on your watch, right?
Okay.
Or get one of those little, $12 pulse oximeters on Amazon, put it on your finger. You'll see it, right? If you don't feel it, which almost everybody feels it, but for the couple of stalwarts who, are incredulous and don't feel it, just look at the data, right?
Yeah. Check out. So the website is inhalehydration.com.
Yeah.
I believe our code is longevity. I'm pretty sure that's what it is.
That is correct.
And give you a little incentive to give it a try.
Yeah.
And let us know your thoughts. Like, you know what? I think we're both in a situation where we're receiving. Like I think we're interested to hear your stories and comments.
Anybody who tries it, I would love different use case scenarios for where you found benefit from it. The asthmatic person, that reached out with that one thing that I cited was great, and then the other couple of people that had similar responses. That was fascinating to me. Like I would not have thought that it was a use case scenario that literally asthmatics never even hit my radar.
And now this is a bit weird, and I'm trying to think of. There's a lot of reasons why this might not be a good idea, but would there be any topical wound? I mean, it's not sterile, is it?
Yeah, well, it actually is
when you initially open it up.
You first open
you wonder with a.
I don't know. Actually, that's a good question. I would be curious. Well, one of the other use cases
because you couldn't boil it and use it because then you'll boil off the oxygen.
Yeah,
so that'll
very very rapidly. Free diving. I had some free divers that used it, and that was remarkable because the
that
breath,
would be insane.
Well, so the breath hold increased 40% on one of them.
On free diving.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Which it's a
bit of an acid test if you think about it. Though.
Yeah. Well, my concern there was with people with shallow water syndrome, right? Because of a shift in the ratios of carbon dioxide and oxygen saturation. But, under kind of controlled circumstances with the free divers, we did it. And yeah, we got like a 40% shift in the hold capacity, which was pretty hip.
Please don't try this at home.
Somebody just
drown trying to hold their breath somewhere in a bathtub or something. I don't know.
Oh,
It's just
haven't heard that.
these are like crazy experiments. Like free divers are professionals. This is what they do. They understand their limitations. They know the signs.
And they did it
far.
not 100 feet underwater at first. So that that's the other thing is.
But again, I mean, its proof is in the pudding. So the pulse oximeter is like a little sensor you put on the end of your finger. If you've ever been hospitalized, they would have put this on your finger to see how much oxygen is in your blood.
Right.
And they're probably not expensive.
No, they're like $12 on Amazon.
Oh my God.
They're super cheap.
I'm going in.
Yeah.
Going in to buy one. Ian, thank you. It's always such a pleasure.
It is always a pleasure. I am happy, very, very happy actually to be here doing this. So.
Oh, me too. Oh, actually, I should divulge that I was so excited about this. I actually got the opportunity to invest a microscopic amount of money into this company. So for full transparency, I did, not that it's going to change the needle on anybody. I don't know. Maybe somebody will get a baseball cap out of it or something. But I did make a micro investment in this. I'm very proud of myself. It's like one of the first things.
And I genuinely appreciate that. Yeah, we there have been a handful of people that I'm really very happy to be formally involved in something with. So,
well, same, because I'm always so fascinated by what Ian's doing. I'm like, I don't know, can I do something? So anyway, so here we are. All right, guys, thank you so much for checking in. If you were just listening to this, definitely check out the YouTube, at least for the end part. And yeah, until we meet again, my friend, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.